The silver-hulled ships appeared at dawn, their massive forms blocking out the rising sun over major cities across Earth. They emerged from hyperspace with impossible grace, their surfaces rippling like liquid mercury in the morning light. No warnings, no demands, no communication. Just three enormous vessels positioning themselves strategically around the planet. Inside the command ship, Supreme Commander Valen studied the holographic displays with growing disdain. The environmental readings from the planet below defied logic. Some regions showed temperature variations of over 40 degrees within a single planetary rotation. How could any civilization survive, let alone develop, in such chaotic conditions? Preliminary analysis complete, Supreme Commander reported Science Officer Melith, her crystalline data tablet displaying streams of information. The dominant species appears to have achieved basic spaceflight and rudimentary digital technology, but they have made no attempts to stabilize their planetary climate. They simply endure these conditions. Valen's inner eyelids flickered in disbelief. The concept seemed absurd to a species that had spent millennia perfecting environmental control. The Kareth had long since eliminated such inefficiencies on their homeworld, maintaining a perfect spring-like climate across their entire planet. Their defensive capabilities, Valen inquired, mandibles clicking softly in contemplation. Primitive projectile weapons, basic energy shields, and nuclear devices, another officer reported. Their most advanced military installations are concentrated in the temperature-stable regions. The extreme zones appear largely undefended. Valen's head tentacles rippled with amusement. Of course, the humans would cluster their defenses in the only sensible areas of their planet. The harsh zones would be uninhabitable by any reasonable standard. The initial scans revealed more peculiarities. Humans had built sprawling cities in regions where temperature swung wildly between extremes. They had settlements in areas that received almost no precipitation, and others that were battered by constant storms. Instead of transforming these hostile environments, they had somehow adapted to live within them. Begin deployment preparations, Valen commanded. Target their military installations in the stable regions first. Our environmental systems will perform optimally there. The commander paused, studying a particular reading with puzzlement. Mark these desert regions as low priority. The temperature variations would put unnecessary strain on our equipment. As the crew began their preparations, automated probes descended through Earth's atmosphere, gathering more detailed data. The ship's artificial intelligence compiled the information, creating a comprehensive map of human defensive capabilities. Everything proceeded according to standard invasion protocols. Yet something about the humans' apparent disregard for environmental control bothered Valen. How could a species advance so far without mastering something so fundamental? The commander dismissed the concern. Clearly, this indicated their primitive nature, nothing more. In the ship's technology center, engineers made final adjustments to the invasion force's environmental suits. Each suit was a masterpiece of Kareth engineering, maintaining perfect temperature and humidity for its wearer regardless of external conditions. They had never failed in any previous campaign across hundreds of worlds. All systems are optimal, Supreme Commander reported the chief engineer. Our warriors will operate at peak efficiency in the targeted regions. Valen gave the final authorization, and the first wave of dropships began launching from the fleet. They descended through the atmosphere like falling stars, their hulls designed to inspire awe and terror in primitive species. The Kareth were about to demonstrate the superiority of their environmentally perfected civilization. As the invasion forces deployed, none of the aliens noticed the small detail in their tactical displays. The vast desert regions they had dismissed as uninhabitable were not uninhabited at all. Millions of humans lived there, thriving in conditions that the Kareth's computers had classified as unsurvivable. It would prove to be a very costly oversight. The Kareth's initial assault was devastating in its precision. Their dropships descended upon military bases in temperate zones with mechanical grace, environmental systems humming in perfect harmony. Human defenders watched in horror as their most advanced weapons barely scratched the invaders' shields. Within hours, key installations across Europe, North America, and coastal Asia fell silent. Supreme Commander Valen observed the victories with satisfaction from the command ship's tactical center. As expected, the commander noted, mandibles clicking in approval. Their resistance in the optimal zones is crumbling. But the tactical AI flagged an anomaly. Several strategic positions remained unaccounted for, deep in the Sahara Desert, the Arabian Peninsula, and the American Southwest. Crucial human military assets continued to operate. These bases, though smaller, housed command centers that needed to be neutralized. Deploy the third wave to these outlying positions, Valen ordered. Let us end this quickly. The dropships streaked across the desert skies like shooting stars, their hulls gleaming in the merciless sun. The first warning signs appeared almost immediately. Engineering Officer Kelly's voice crackled over the command channel, unusually tense. Supreme Commander, we're registering thermal stress warnings across all deployed units in the desert regions. The temperature differentials are exceeding our safety parameters. Valen dismissed the concern. Adjust the environmental systems to compensate. We cannot, Commander. The external temperature is rising too rapidly. Our cooling systems are operating at 200% capacity, and it's barely noon in these regions. The situation deteriorated rapidly. In the Mojave Desert, a squadron of Kareth warriors reported critical failures in their environmental suits. The perfect technology that had never failed them was buckling under the intense heat. Their weapons, calibrated for optimal performance in controlled conditions, began to malfunction. Impossible, muttered Science Officer Melith, her crystalline tablet displaying cascading error messages. These readings must be incorrect. No civilized species could function in these conditions. But the humans were functioning. More than that, they were fighting back with unexpected effectiveness. Local military units, seemingly unconcerned by the blistering heat, launched guerrilla strikes against the struggling alien forces. Their primitive but hardy equipment continued to operate while the Kareth's advanced technology faltered. In the Arabian Desert, an entire Kareth unit went dark as their environmental systems overloaded. Their final transmission described temperatures that the Science Division had deemed theoretically survivable but functionally impossible for sustained operations. Valen watched in growing concern as more red warning indicators appeared on the tactical display. The carefully planned invasion was encountering an obstacle that no amount of technological superiority seemed able to overcome: Earth's natural extremes. Pull back all forces from these desert regions, Valen finally ordered. Concentrate our efforts on the stable zones where we hold the advantage. But the damage was done. News of the Kareth's vulnerability spread quickly through human defense networks. Earth's military strategists, initially demoralized by the aliens' overwhelming power in temperate regions, began to see a pattern and an opportunity. In the command ship's engineering section, teams worked frantically to modify their environmental systems, but each attempt to adapt their technology to these extreme conditions failed. Their civilization had spent so long controlling their environment that they had lost the ability to handle any significant variation. As the sun set over the desert battlefields, the Kareth faced an uncomfortable reality. Their perfect environmental control, the pride of their civilization, had become a critical weakness. The very conditions they had dismissed as primitive were proving to be Earth's most effective defense. Supreme Commander, reported the tactical officer, we're detecting human military convoys moving into the desert regions. They appear to be relocating their command centers deeper into the extreme zones. Valen stared at the tactical display, inner eyelids flickering rapidly. For the first time in the commander's long career, victory no longer seemed certain. The humans weren't just surviving in these hostile environments. They were using them as weapons. Hassan had lived in the Sahara for all his 45 years, following the paths his grandfather had taught him. When he found the alien vessel half buried in the dunes, his first thought was how poorly designed it seemed for desert conditions. Its smooth, temperature-regulated surface had already begun to fail under the relentless sun. He approached cautiously, his camel snorting at the strange scents. The vessel's hull, which might have looked impressive in more temperate regions, was already showing signs of thermal stress. Fine cracks spread across its surface like a spider's web, and its cooling systems whined in protest against the heat. Central Command, this is Desert Scout Team 4. Hassan spoke into his radio. I found another one. Same problems as the others. Their cooling systems can't handle the temperature swings. He studied the abandoned craft with experienced eyes. They really don't understand the desert at all. Similar discoveries were being made across Earth's harshest regions. In the Mojave Desert, Sarah Redcloud, a veteran tracker, led a military reconnaissance team to 3 more disabled alien craft. Their environmental systems had failed catastrophically during the previous night's dramatic temperature drop. It's almost funny, Sarah reported back to base. They built ships that can cross galaxies, but they can't handle a normal desert night. The temperature swing from day to night knocked out their systems completely. The pattern was becoming clear. The aliens' technology, for all its advancement, was paradoxically fragile. It required constant, perfect conditions to operate. Conditions that simply didn't exist in Earth's deserts. At a hastily established command center deep in the Arabian Desert, international military leaders gathered to analyze the mounting evidence. General Chen studied the holographic display showing the locations of disabled alien craft. Every single one was in an area that experienced extreme temperature variations. Their weakness isn't just the heat, he explained to the assembled officers. It's their inability to handle rapid environmental changes. Our desert regions experience temperature swings of up to 40 degrees between day and night. Their systems can't adapt fast enough. Outside the command center, local guides and desert warfare experts began training military units from around the world in desert survival techniques. Knowledge that had been passed down through generations was now becoming Earth's most valuable defense strategy. Watch how the sand moves, explained Fatima, a third-generation desert guide, to a group of Special Forces operators. The dunes can tell you where to find shelter, where to find water. The aliens don't read these signs. They don't even try to understand them. In the Atacama Desert, Chilean military forces discovered another crucial advantage. The alien sensors, calibrated for what they considered normal conditions, were easily confused by heat mirages and sandstorms. Local units, using traditional navigation methods, could move almost invisibly through their own territory. Reports continued to flow in from across the globe's desert regions. The Kareth's perfect environmental suits were failing not just from the heat, but from sand infiltration, extreme dryness, and the constant fluctuation between scorching days and frigid nights. A young lieutenant in the Australian outback summed it up perfectly. They've spent so long controlling their environment that they've forgotten how to adapt to one. We've been adapting to these conditions for thousands of years. As the sun set over the Sahara, Hassan stood atop a dune, watching another alien vessel struggle against the approaching sandstorm. Their technology could navigate between stars, but couldn't handle the simple, raw power of wind-blown sand. They see our desert as empty, hostile, uncontrollable, he murmured to himself. They never understood that's where its strength lies. We learned to live with the desert, to read its moods, to respect its power. They try to fight it, and the desert never loses such battles. In orbit, Supreme Commander Valen received yet another report of equipment failures in the desert regions. The reality was becoming unavoidable. Their superior technology was being defeated not by human weapons, but by the very environment they had dismissed as primitive. Dr. Sarah Chen wiped sweat from her forehead as she examined the disabled alien environmental suit. The underground laboratory, hastily established in an old desert bunker, hummed with activity as scientists from around the world worked to understand their invaders' fatal flaw. The suit before her represented their best chance at understanding the Kareth's weakness. "Look at this," she called to her colleague, Dr. Mohammed Hassan, a thermal engineering expert from Egypt. Their temperature regulation system isn't designed for adaptation at all. It's built for maintenance of a single, perfect condition. Mohammed studied the complex circuitry through a microscope. Fascinating. They've created something so advanced it's become fundamentally inflexible. The system tries to maintain a constant 22 degrees Celsius, regardless of external conditions. The breakthrough came when they subjected the suit to a controlled temperature cycle, mimicking the desert's day-night pattern. The system's response was revealing. It fought desperately to maintain its predetermined perfect temperature, consuming massive amounts of energy in the process. It's like watching someone try to air condition the outdoors, Sarah observed, studying the power consumption graphs. Their entire technological philosophy is based on controlling the environment rather than adapting to it. Across the laboratory, teams analyzed other pieces of alien technology. Each device showed the same critical vulnerability, an inability to handle rapid environmental changes. The Kirith had engineered their way into an evolutionary corner. General Torres arrived for the daily briefing, accompanied by Rashid, a veteran desert survival expert. The contrast between his traditional desert clothing and her modern military uniform seemed to perfectly symbolize the unique fusion of old and new knowledge needed to face this threat. "Show me what you found," the general requested, studying the holographic displays of test results. Sarah pulled up the thermal imaging data. Their technology is incredibly advanced, but it's built on a false premise. They assumed that controlling the environment was superior to adapting to it. Everything they've created requires perfectly stable conditions to function. Meanwhile, Rashid added, gesturing to his light, layered clothing. "We learned thousands of years ago that the key to desert survival is adapting to conditions rather than fighting them. Their suits are like wearing a refrigerator, impressive until it breaks down." The implications were staggering. The aliens' technological superiority had become their greatest weakness. Their equipment, designed for optimal performance in controlled conditions, was essentially useless in Earth's most extreme environments. Dr. Chen's team worked through the night, documenting every vulnerability they discovered. The aliens' weapons showed the same critical flaw. Their power cells overheated easily, their targeting systems were confused by heat mirages, and their communication networks were disrupted by sandstorms. They've never had to solve these problems, Mohammed realized. Their entire civilization evolved in controlled environments. They probably engineered their homeworld to eliminate environmental variations entirely. Sarah nodded, remembering her own childhood in Singapore. Humans did the opposite. We spread across every environment on Earth, adapting to conditions rather than trying to perfect them. Our technology evolved to be robust rather than optimal. The team compiled their findings into a comprehensive report. The Kirith's environmental suits would fail catastrophically if subjected to a temperature swing of more than 30 degrees Celsius. Their weapons became unreliable in high humidity or extreme dry conditions. Their sensors could be blinded by natural phenomena, their systems classified as impossible. "We don't need to defeat their technology," Sarah explained to the assembled military leaders. "We just need to let Earth's natural environment do it for us. The very conditions they consider primitive and chaotic are our greatest defense." As she finished presenting the team's findings, a new message arrived from the front lines. The aliens were attempting to establish a base in the Simpson Desert of Australia. Local temperatures were forecast to reach 45 degrees Celsius by noon. General Torres smiled. "Let's see how their perfect systems handle that." General Maria Torres stood before the holographic map in the underground command center, watching red dots representing Kirith forces slowly move across the terrain. Each movement brought them closer to the trap her team had spent weeks preparing. Operation Mirage was about to begin. "All units report ready," her communications officer announced. "Desert Scout teams are in position across all target zones." Maria nodded, her expression focused. The plan seemed almost too simple. Draw the aliens into Earth's harshest environments, and let nature do what advanced weapons couldn't. But executing it required precise coordination between military units and local desert guides across 3 continents. "Launch Phase 1, she ordered. "Let's make them think they've found our weakness." Across the globe, military units began their carefully choreographed retreat. In the Movav, mechanized divisions pulled back from their positions, leaving behind evidence of hasty evacuation. Similar movements occurred in the Arabian Peninsula and the Australian outback. High above Earth, Supreme Commander Valen observed the human forces' apparent disorganization with satisfaction. "They're finally breaking," the commander announced to the bridge crew. "Their primitive forces are retreating into the wastelands." The Kareth took the bait. Their dropships descended upon the abandoned positions, their warriors confident in their technological superiority. They didn't notice how their pursuit routes had been carefully planned to lead them deeper into the desert regions. Omar, a Bedouin guide working with the Egyptian military, watched through high-powered binoculars as an alien patrol followed their false tracks into a narrow wadi. "They're still using their navigation systems," he reported. "They haven't realized the sand dunes have shifted since their last scan." The first phase of Operation Mirage proved devastatingly effective. Alien units pursuing what they thought were retreating human forces found themselves drawn into natural dead ends. Valleys that appeared passable on their scans turned out to be blocked by recent sandstorms. Underground bunkers that showed up on their sensors were actually mirages. In the Simpson Desert, Australian Special Forces worked with Aboriginal rangers to lead alien patrols into areas where daily temperature swings were most extreme. The Kareth's environmental systems, already strained by the heat, began failing as nighttime temperatures plummeted. "Their tactical algorithms can't handle organic strategy," Maria observed, watching more red dots disappear from her display. "They're looking for patterns that don't exist in desert warfare." The operation's second phase began as the aliens tried to compensate for their mounting losses. They attempted to establish forward bases in what their scans showed as stable zones, not realizing these areas were about to experience seasonal sandstorms. Local knowledge proved invaluable. Desert dwellers who had spent generations reading weather patterns helped time each strategic movement. They knew exactly when the winds would shift, when temperatures would be most extreme, and where the sand would prove too treacherous for the aliens' heavy equipment. "They're fighting the desert," observed Colonel Chen, watching through thermal imaging as another alien base disappeared under mountains of sand. "We're just stepping aside and letting it win." The Kareth's response to each failure followed predictable patterns. They would increase power to their environmental systems, only to have them fail more spectacularly. They would adjust their sensors, only to be further confused by natural phenomena they had never encountered before. In orbit, Valen received increasingly desperate reports from ground forces. The humans weren't fighting back in any way their tactical computers could understand. They seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, appearing briefly before vanishing into terrain that registered as unsurvivable on Kareth scanners. Maria studied the latest battlefield updates with grim satisfaction. The aliens' casualties were mounting, not from human weapons, but from equipment failures, environmental stress, and simple exhaustion. Their perfect technology was being defeated by the imperfect, chaotic nature of Earth's deserts. "Send word to all commands," she ordered. "Begin Phase 3. Let's show them what Desert Storm really means." The great sandstorm rose like a wall across the horizon, its massive orange clouds dwarfing the Kareth's military columns. Their sensors registered it as an environmental anomaly. But to Hassan and his fellow guides, it was the breath of the desert itself, arriving exactly when they had predicted it would. "Now we'll see how their perfect machines handle a real haboob," Hassan murmured, adjusting his protective goggles. He and his team had spent days leading the alien forces into this specific valley, knowing what was coming. The storm struck with prehistoric fury. Winds howling at over 70 miles per hour drove clouds of sand into every seam and joint of the aliens' equipment. Their environmental suits, already struggling with the heat, began failing in new and catastrophic ways as fine particles invaded their cooling systems. In the command center, General Torres watched through satellite imagery as the massive storm engulfed the alien forces. "Their ships can cross the galaxy," she observed, "but they never learn to respect a planet's natural forces." The Kereth's response to the sandstorm highlighted their fundamental misunderstanding of desert warfare. They attempted to power through it, increasing energy to their shields, only to have their systems overheat faster. Their tactical computers, programmed for optimal conditions, could not compute effective strategies for these conditions. Across the Movav, Native American trackers led special forces teams through narrow canyons that channeled the hot winds. The aliens' sensors, blinded by the swirling sand, failed to detect the humans moving easily through their own territory. Generations of knowledge, passed down through stories and experience, proved more valuable than the most advanced alien technology. "They're trying to fight the desert," Sarah Redcloud explained to her team as they watched another alien vessel ground itself, its anti-gravity systems clogged with sand. "Our ancestors learned long ago that you don't fight the desert. You learn its ways, respect its power, and move with it, not against it." The temperature swing as night fell brought new challenges for the invaders. Their environmental systems, taxed by hours of fighting the heat and sand, couldn't adjust fast enough to the rapid cooling. The desert, dropping from 50 degrees Celsius to near freezing, showed no mercy to technology that demanded stability. In orbit, Supreme Commander Valen received damage reports that defied belief. Entire squadrons were going dark, not from enemy fire, but from what the Kereth had dismissed as primitive environmental conditions. Their warriors, trained to rely on perfect technology, found themselves helpless against forces they couldn't control. Local military units, using traditional navigation techniques and simple, rugged equipment, began picking off the stranded alien forces. Their own weapons and vehicles, designed to function in extreme conditions, proved far more reliable than the invaders' supposedly superior technology. "Look at how they built their machines," observed Colonel Chen, examining a disabled alien vehicle. "Everything is sealed against environmental variation." They never considered that sealing something perfectly just means it can't adapt at all. The desert people's knowledge transformed into tactical advantages. They knew exactly when and where the winds would be strongest, how the sand dunes would shift, and where the mirages would be most disorienting. This ancient wisdom, combined with modern military strategy, created an environment where the aliens' technological superiority became meaningless. A young Bedouin guide, watching through binoculars as another alien unit struggled against the elements, smiled beneath his traditional keffiyeh. "My grandmother always said the desert teaches humility," he remarked to the Special Forces team he was leading. "Today it teaches that lesson to beings from another world." As the sun set over the Sahara, the storm began to abate, revealing the scale of the aliens' defeat. Their mighty machines lay half-buried in sand, their perfect systems undone by the simple, raw power of Earth's most extreme environment. The desert had done what advanced weapons could not. It had shown the invaders that some forces cannot be controlled, only respected and understood. Supreme Commander Valen stood motionless before the holographic display, inner eyelids flickering rapidly as reports of catastrophic failures continued to flood in. The command ship's atmosphere felt oppressive despite its perfect environmental controls. Perhaps, the commander realized, that perfection was part of the problem. "Another battalion lost in the region they called Death Valley," reported Science Officer Melith, her voice carrying an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. Environmental systems failed completely. The temperature variations exceeded all known parameters for sustainable operation. The tactical display told a story that challenged everything the Kereth had believed about technological superiority. Their forces, equipped with the most advanced environmental systems in known space, were being systematically defeated by simple heat and sand. In the Arabian desert, a Kereth rescue mission discovered their latest military base reduced to useless machinery. The humans hadn't attacked it. They hadn't needed to. The base's environmental systems had failed during a sandstorm, and the subsequent temperature swing had finished what the sand began. How do they survive in these conditions? Valen demanded, mandibles clicking in agitation. Our scans show human settlements thriving in regions that our systems classify as uninhabitable. Dr. Chen, monitoring the alien communications from the underground command center, smiled at the intercepted question. They still don't understand, she told General Torres. They're looking for technology that doesn't exist. Our advantage isn't better environmental control. It's learning to live without it. The Coreth's attempts to adapt their technology proved futile. Each modification, each reinforcement of their environmental systems only made them more vulnerable to the desert's extremes. Their perfect technology had become a perfect liability. Supreme Commander, the chief engineer reported, we've lost contact with 60% of our ground forces. The survivors report critical failures in all systems designed for environmental regulation. We cannot compensate for these conditions. Valen's head tentacles writhed in distress. The commander had led campaigns across hundreds of worlds, but never encountered a situation where technological superiority meant so little. The humans weren't just surviving in these harsh conditions, they were using them as weapons. In the Mojave Desert, local guides watched alien rescue ships attempting to recover their stranded forces. The ship's powerful engines stirred up blinding clouds of sand, their own sensors becoming useless in the chaos they created. The humans, using simple goggles and traditional navigation methods, moved easily through conditions that paralyzed their invaders. They built their civilization on the assumption that they could control everything, observed Hassan, watching through binoculars as another alien vessel struggled against the wind. They never learned that some forces are meant to be respected, not controlled. The Coreth's pride had led them into a trap of their own making. Their warriors, trained to rely on perfect environmental control, found themselves unable to function when that control failed. The very advancement they had prided themselves on had become their greatest weakness. We have lost contact with the Western Command Post, reported the tactical officer. Their final transmission indicated total system failure due to sand infiltration. They reported that the humans were moving through the storm as if it didn't exist. In the command ship's engineering section, frantic attempts to modify their technology continued. But each failure brought a deeper realization. They had engineered themselves into an evolutionary dead end. Their pursuit of perfect environmental control had left them unable to handle any environment they couldn't control. Valen stared at the tactical display, watching more red indicators fade to black. The humans had never needed to defeat their technology. They had simply let their planet do it for them. The commander's final report to the High Command would be the hardest of their career. Admission that their perfect civilization had been undone, not by superior weapons, but by simple environmental conditions they had dismissed as primitive. The desert wind carried the sound of alien engines powering up for the last time. Across Earth's harshest regions, the Coreth gathered their surviving forces, abandoning equipment too damaged by sand and sun to salvage. Their retreat marked not just the end of an invasion, but the collapse of their fundamental beliefs about civilization itself. Supreme Commander Valen stood before the High Council's holographic projection in the command ship's central chamber. The report was the most difficult of the commander's career. We must withdraw from Earth. Their world has proven incompatible with our methods of warfare. In the shadows of a massive dune, Hassan watched the alien ships rise into the dawn sky. Beside him, Dr. Chen reviewed data from their final scans of the retreating forces. The aliens' mighty vessels, designed to cross galaxies, struggled against the simple friction of sand in their systems. They came expecting to find primitives, Hassan observed, adjusting his traditional headscarf against the morning wind. Instead, they found humans who had mastered what they could not, the art of thriving in chaos. The global defense network buzzed with confirmation signals as alien ships broke orbit around the world. In the underground command center, General Torres studied the retreat patterns on her tactical display. They're not just retreating, she noted. They're running from something they finally understand. Perfect control is a weakness, not a strength. Across the Movav, Sarah Redcloud led her team in documenting abandoned alien technology. The once gleaming equipment lay half-buried in sand, its perfect systems undone by the simple, raw power of wind and temperature. My grandmother used to say that the desert teaches wisdom to those willing to learn, she told the research team. Today it taught wisdom to the stars themselves. The Kareth's final transmission reached every major communication center on Earth. Supreme Commander Valen's message was brief but profound. You have shown us that adaptation is superior to control. Your planet's harsh regions, which we dismissed as wastelands, are your greatest strength. We leave with this understanding. True advancement lies not in conquering nature, but in learning to thrive within it. In the aftermath, Earth's desert regions gain new respect in the global community. The traditional knowledge of desert peoples, once dismissed as primitive by many, became recognized as crucial wisdom for planetary defense. Military strategists began incorporating desert warfare techniques into standard doctrine, acknowledging that the ability to adapt to extreme conditions was more valuable than the most advanced technology. Dr. Chen presented her final analysis to the United Nations Security Council. The Kareth's failure wasn't technological, it was philosophical. They built their civilization on the assumption that controlling the environment was the height of advancement. We succeeded because we never forgot how to adapt. The aliens' abandoned equipment became the foundation for new research initiatives. Scientists studying the technology confirmed what the desert peoples had known all along. Systems designed for perfect conditions would always fail when faced with the dynamic chaos of nature. Hassan stood atop the dune where he had first discovered the alien vessel, now watching the sun set over a changed world. The tracks of the invaders were already disappearing, the desert reclaiming the land as it had for millennia. The desert remembers, he told the young guides he was training. It remembers those who respect it, and those who do not. In orbit, the last Kareth ship prepared for faster-than-light travel. Supreme Commander Valen took a final look at the blue planet below, its vast desert regions no longer appearing as empty wastelands on their scans, but as powerful barriers that had proven more effective than any weapon. The invasion had failed, but it had taught both humans and aliens an invaluable lesson. True resilience comes not from creating perfect conditions, but from learning to thrive in imperfect ones. Earth's deserts, dismissed as hostile and primitive, had proven to be the perfect defense against a civilization that had forgotten how to adapt.